They told you that being nice was the key to acceptance, that all you had to do was smile, be predictable, and give up on yourself to earn respect, love, and even recognition. But the cruel truth is that this never gave you power. On the contrary, it made you predictable, manipulable, and often invisible. Machiavelli warned that politics guided by reality, not ideals, shows that the world doesn't respect pure intentions. It respects limits, firmness, and the courage to face consequences. Throughout this video, you'll discover that kindness without strategy is a trap that turns into submission. You'll understand how morality, when blind, doesn't protect, but exposes. You'll delve into the psychology of submission, realizing that fear of rejection often disguises itself as empathy, and that the yes, spoken to please, is actually a silent sentence against one's own freedom. You'll also learn why Machiavelli said it's better to be feared than loved, and not in the brutal sense, but in the sense that respect is born from clear boundaries. You'll see how to balance the cunning of the fox and the strength of the lion, spotting traps while simultaneously asserting your presence. Because power isn't about shouting the loudest, but being remembered when silence falls. And it doesn't stop there. You'll understand that the world doesn't react to how you feel, but to the image you project. That always appearing accessible is making yourself disposable, and that projecting firmness changes not only how others treat you, but how you see yourself. You'll face the dilemma between freedom and love, realizing that the obsession with being loved is the most comfortable and dangerous prison there is. Ultimately, you'll be faced with the most uncomfortable choice of all: continue living as the domesticated good guy, applauded but never respected, or fully embrace the path of authenticity, where being good isn't about disappearing, but about fully existing even under disapproval. Brace yourself. This video wasn't made to please you, but to poke you where you've always avoided looking. If you have the courage to stay until the end, you might discover the truth that separates those who live in the shadows from those who finally decide to sit on their own throne. From a young age, we've been conditioned to believe that kindness alone would open all doors, that being kind and considerate would guarantee us respect, love, and opportunities. However, when real life enters the picture, the story unfolds quite differently. Kindness without strategy, without awareness of the invisible forces that govern human relationships, ends up turning into submission. How many times has someone trusted too much, only to be manipulated by co-workers, family members, or even romantic partners? The problem isn't being kind, but believing that kindness is enough. When one falls into this trap, one becomes predictable, loses strength, and in many cases finds oneself used as a ladder for others to climb. It's like giving away all one's cards before the game even begins. Deep down, this naivete stems from an illusion that others will always reciprocate in kind. But Machiavelli already warned, politics guided by reality, not ideals, shows that human beings respect limits far more than pure intentions. A practical example: imagine a corporate environment. The employee who accepts all extra tasks without question, believing they will be recognized for their kindness, ends up becoming the one everyone exploits. Meanwhile, the colleague who sets clear boundaries, who knows how to say no when necessary, earns respect, even if sometimes seen as difficult. The difference is stark. One sinks into overload and invisibility. The other rises because they demonstrate virtù and fortuna, the ability to combine personal talent with a realistic understanding of the circumstances. Unprotected kindness is like leaving your front door unlocked at night. It may even show trust, but it invites risks. Does the end justify the means? Not always. But when the means is to protect your integrity, this calculation becomes indispensable. Because those who don't learn to use calculated force, even if symbolic, become trapped in a cycle of frustrated expectations and unequal relationships. The curious thing is that this kindness trap doesn't reveal itself immediately. At first, the person feels they're doing the right thing, that they're being accepted and even praised for being good. But over time, they realize that those who praise them are the ones who demand the most of them. It's the paradox of the appearance of virtue. The more you strive to please, the more invisible you become as an individual. This dynamic appears in friendships, at work, and even in the family. Have you ever noticed how the nice guy is almost never taken seriously in a serious discussion? This happens because kindness without firmness comes across as weakness. And the world, guided by decisions based on real human nature, tends to exploit weaknesses. This is where the reflection begins to deepen. If kindness without strategy makes us manipulable, what after all protects us? Perhaps the answer lies in the balance between morality and effectiveness, a topic that opens the next window of this journey. The idea that being morally correct is enough to prosper is one of the most dangerous illusions ever taught. The real world doesn't just reward intentions, it rewards results. Machiavelli reminds us that trying to be merely virtuous is naive and often fatal for those who wish to maintain their own position. There's no point wearing the mask of goodness if, behind the scenes, others play by different rules. How many times have you seen someone extremely competent be overtaken by someone who knew how to use calculated force, creating alliances, commanding respect, or even occupying space without asking permission? This doesn't mean abandoning principles, but understanding that politics guided by reality, not ideals, is what dictates the human game. Being moral without effectiveness is like having a flawless ship anchored forever, beautiful to look at, but useless to navigate. Blind kindness without firmness inevitably leads to exploitation. In the business environment, for example, companies that rely solely on their image of being good often fail when faced with competitors prepared for war. Leaders who know how to balance virtù and fortuna, personal talent combined with a good understanding of the circumstances, can not only survive but thrive. This also applies to personal life. A parent who only tries to be a friend to their children without setting limits ends up raising insecure or undisciplined young people. Love without structure turns into chaos, and morality without effectiveness turns into weakness. Does the end justify the means? Perhaps not in all situations, but when the means is to ensure respect, boundaries, and continuity, it's inevitable to accept that effectiveness is worth more than pure intentions. Here's a key point. The world doesn't just respect what you feel, it respects what you sustain. Pure intentions are invisible without firm actions to give them substance. It's like a promise of change without action. It sounds nice, but no one believes it. This is the difference between those who want to be loved at any cost and those who understand that often it's better to be feared than loved. Healthy fear isn't about violence, but about respecting the consequences. And without clear consequences, kindness becomes an invitation to abuse. This realization is disturbing because it dismantles centuries of beliefs about morality as an absolute guide. However, understanding this opens a portal. Perhaps the submission so many mistake for kindness has deeper roots, linked to fears we pretend not to have. This is precisely what leads us to the next step, the psychology of submission. Most people who live trapped in the role of nice guys don't realize that their kindness is just a mask for fear. Fear of being rejected, of appearing selfish, of losing affection or recognition. This fear masquerades as empathy, but in practice, it's submission. Carl Jung would say it's the unconscious shadow at work. You believe you're being generous, when in fact, you're just avoiding the pain of disappointing someone. Politics guided by reality, not ideals, shows that people rarely realize this dynamic in themselves. They believe they choose to be good, when, deep down, they're just trying to survive. It's a silent theater in which the audience applauds, but the actor leaves the stage exhausted, empty, and increasingly distant from their own authenticity. A simple example: that person who never says no to invitations, favors, or extra demands. They accept them not because they want to, but because they fear being seen as cold or ungrateful. And herein lies the trap. Every yes said out of fear is another brick in the prison of submission. The world interprets this behavior as predictability, and predictability, according to Machiavelli, is weakness. Those who don't set limits become easy targets for manipulation. And this doesn't just happen in work relationships. Love life is also full of examples. Partners who accept humiliation, believing that giving in is love, when in fact it's just effacing themselves to avoid abandonment. This is where the end justifies the means takes an unexpected turn. Saying no, even at the risk of displeasing, is a necessary means to regain dignity. Submission is an unconscious pact. You surrender your freedom in exchange for conditioned affection. It feels like love, but it's fear. It feels like virtue, but it's weakness. And the curious thing is that the more someone molds themselves to please, the further they become from what they truly desire. It's the classic case of someone who lives for others and then wonders why they don't feel fulfilled. The appearance of virtue sustains this act, but in practice, it creates armies of domesticated individuals. And if loyal armies of one's own are the basis of any power, living in submission is to depend on the armies of others. Ultimately, the psychology of submission reveals that life is not about pleasing, but about sustaining who you are. However, to sustain yourself, you must understand how to act with firmness. And this is where Machiavelli's most symbolic lesson emerges, being both the fox and the lion. Machiavelli teaches that true power is not born from the rigidity of being merely strong, nor from the fragility of being merely cunning. It arises from the combination of being both fox and lion. The fox, with its cunning, identifies traps, perceives hidden intentions, and observes what is unsaid. The lion, with its strength, commands respect without needing to explain itself. Those who try to live solely as foxes lose themselves in manipulation, and those who live solely as lions end up falling into ambushes. The balance between the two is what builds real power. Think of a leader. If they only shout, the group fears them but doesn't truly follow them. If they are only clever, they are eventually unmasked. But if you unite the two, you create loyalty and respect. Ultimately, this is what Machiavelli calls virtù and fortuna, using your personal talent while knowing how to read the winds of reality. In practice, being a fox means learning to spot hidden signs. It's realizing that a coworker who overpraises might be laying the groundwork to ask for a favor. It's recognizing that someone's silence in a negotiation could be a pressure strategy. Being a lion means having the courage to set clear boundaries, not accepting abusive tasks, not tolerating disrespect, not negotiating non-negotiable values. A simple example. In a relationship, the fox senses when the other begins to manipulate with emotional blackmail. The lion has the strength to say enough without bowing to guilt. The calculated use of force isn't brutality, but firmness. It's the gesture of someone who, by saying no, protects their freedom. And in a politics guided by reality, not ideals, this balance is worth more than 1,000 beautiful intentions. This fox-lion binomial also applies to financial life. The fox studies the market, notices trends, and assesses risks. The lion makes quick decisions, cuts unnecessary expenses, and invests courageously. Those who are solely foxes can become paralyzed by eternal analysis. Those who are solely lions can lose everything through impulsiveness. But those who combine analysis and action build solid assets. The same goes for social relationships. The fox understands who deserves trust. The lion surrounds itself with loyal armies that support its journey. And perhaps this is the key. Cunning paves the way, strength maintains it. However, even uniting these two poles, there is still a detail that defines how the world sees us. Because in the end, it's not what we feel or think that defines our position. It's the image we project. The world doesn't react to our hidden intentions, but to the image we choose to portray. We may be full of good intentions, but if our outward posture conveys weakness, we'll be treated as fragile. Those who appear always accessible, always available without clear boundaries, end up being seen as disposable resources. And this applies to both work and personal life. It's the effect of the appearance of virtue. By constantly trying to appear good, the individual conveys predictability. And predictability, as Machiavelli taught, is vulnerability. Politics guided by reality, not ideals, shows us that the world doesn't read what we think, but rather what we project. If someone enters a room with the attitude of apologizing for existing, they'll be treated like an extra. But if you enter as someone taking up space, even without saying anything, you already earn respect. An image is projected with every detail: the way they look, the tone of voice, the way they position themselves in a conversation, the silence they choose to maintain. For example, in a meeting, someone who talks too much, trying to convince, seems insecure. Someone who speaks little but firmly conveys authority. This is the calculated use of force applied to communication. And this doesn't mean being arrogant or hostile, but showing that there are limits. The person who responds to messages at any time, who accepts invitations even when they don't want to, conveys that they have no boundaries of their own. Meanwhile, someone who responds in their own time, who knows how to say no without needing to justify themselves, conveys the image of someone who manages their own life, and, inevitably, they are treated with respect. Because the image we project shapes not only how others see us, but also how we begin to see ourselves. This dynamic is so powerful that over time, the projected image begins to reprogram one's own identity. Someone who begins to impose limits, even timidly, discovers that their self-esteem grows with each no said. It's as if the mind learns that respecting oneself isn't selfishness, but survival. Carl Jung said that what we resist persists, and in this case, resisting one's own authenticity generates silent pain. The end clearly justifies the means here. Projecting firmness may, at first, bring discomfort, rejection, or estrangement. But this is the price to gain freedom. And if loyal armies are built on respect, the image we project is the banner they follow. However, even with this awareness, many still cling to the desire to please everyone, and it is at this point that the great prison arises. The obsession with being loved. The search for unconditional love has become an invisible prison for many. From an early age, we've been taught that being loved is the greatest achievement, but we forget to ask the price. When love becomes an obsession, freedom is silently sacrificed. How many times has someone failed to express an opinion, make a decision, or follow a path simply to avoid disappointment? This is the dilemma. Being loved requires compromise, and compromise without conscience becomes chains. Machiavelli said it's better to be feared than loved when love implies dependence. And in a politics guided by reality, not ideals, what sustains power is not the amount of affection received, but the ability to maintain autonomy. Loving is good, but living trapped in the need for approval is like breathing air borrowed from someone else. True freedom arises when we have the courage to disappoint, to say no, and endure the uncomfortable silence afterward. Breaking with the need to be accepted in every circle. It's the calculated use of strength directed inward, the strength to endure the initial loneliness, the cunning to realize it's only temporary. Consider everyday examples. The professional who turns down a promotion because he knows it would destroy his health. The woman who ends a relationship in which she was loved but not respected. The young man who chooses a career contrary to his family's expectations. These choices hurt, but they liberate. The end justifies the means when the means is to support one's own truth. Because in the long run, no one respects someone who lives only to please. Respect is born of boundaries, and true love is born of authenticity. It's curious how the obsession with being loved generates precisely the opposite: fragile, dependent, superficial relationships. Those who hide behind the appearance of virtue to avoid losing affection end up nullifying themselves, and a nullified human being inspires not love, but pity. Loyal armies are not built around a leader who constantly seeks approval, but around someone who knows where they want to go, even alone. And this is where the key emerges. The freedom to be who you are, no matter the cost, is what attracts true love, not the other way around. Constant adaptability here doesn't mean molding yourself to everyone, but sustaining yourself amid criticism and continuing to move forward. Ultimately, the prison of love dissolves when we understand that being good isn't about disappearing, but having the courage to fully exist. And it is precisely this courage that leads us on the path to authenticity. There comes a time when a person realizes the mask of the domesticated good guy doesn't protect, it only imprisons. Authenticity isn't born from trying to please everyone, but from the courage to assert one's own voice, even if it's uncomfortable. Machiavelli once said that decisions based on true human nature are more solid than those based on illusions. And true nature demands a balance between virtue and fortuna, talent and the ability to read the circumstances. Being authentic means understanding that you can't control everyone's approval, but you can maintain your own integrity. It's like someone who decides to stop laughing at jokes they don't find funny or accepting invitations they don't want. Small gestures, but little by little, they change everything. Does the end justify the means? Yes, when the means is to secure sovereignty over oneself. Authenticity is challenging because, unlike blind kindness, it carries immediate risks: rejection, criticism, initial isolation. But these risks are the price of freedom. Those who learn to bear them discover that by setting boundaries, they attract people who truly respect their essence. It's like selecting your own loyal armies rather than relying on fragile alliances. In practice, being authentic can mean changing careers after years, choosing friends who share similar values, or even learning to remain silent in the face of social pressure. This requires constant adaptability, knowing when to retreat, when to advance, and when to simply stand firm. Authenticity is not rigidity, but deep-rooted flexibility. It is the strength of the lion with the cunning of the fox, applied not to the external world, but to your own heart. And yet, being authentic doesn't mean living in constant war with everyone. On the contrary, it's discovering the peace that exists in not needing to pretend. It's understanding that the appearance of virtue only has value when born of conviction, not submission. It's laughing without fear, saying no without guilt, and even enduring the discomfort of being misunderstood. What seemed like loss of love, friendship, approval actually reveals itself as purification. Authenticity removes what isn't real so that what is true remains. And when this happens, life ceases to be a stage and becomes a path. The path of authenticity is narrow, requires courage, but leads to a rediscovery of oneself. Because in the end, it's not being loved at any cost that brings meaning, but being whole. And this is where the video finds its turning point, the choice between remaining domesticated or taking the throne of one's own life. Now that you've heard every part of this uncomfortable truth, The question is simple. What will you do with it? Will you keep giving in, smiling at everyone, hoping your kindness will be rewarded? Or will you have the courage to say no and earn real respect? Because in the real world, it's not the one who pleases the most who wins, but the one who can stand firm. How many times have you realized your will was swallowed just to avoid conflict? How many times have you regretted accepting something you knew you shouldn't? This cycle only ends when you choose authenticity over approval, when you decide your freedom is worth more than easy applause. And yes, it will upset a lot of people, but better to be feared than loved when love comes with chains. So I ask you, are you ready to abandon the role of the domesticated good guy? Are you willing to face the initial loneliness, only to later find relationships, businesses and friendships based on true respect? The decision is yours, and no one can make it for you. If this video touched you, if something stirred within you, don't let it die here. Write in the comments, which part provoked you the most? Because sometimes putting it into words is the first step to changing your life. And of course, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and stay tuned. We still have a lot to unravel together, and the next truth may be even harder to swallow.